The sound of a gavel pounded through the dusty air of Willow Creek, Montana Territory, 1878, as Madeline Frost stood trembling beside the polished oak coffin containing the cold remains of her husband. She clutched her worn shawl tighter around her shoulders, not from the autumn chill but from the horror of what was happening. The auctioneer's voice boomed across the crowd of stern-faced men gathered in the town square, announcing that the widow and all property belonging to the deceased Charles Frost would be sold to settle his substantial debts. "We start the bidding at $50 for the woman," the auctioneer called, his voice detached as if he were selling livestock rather than a human being. "Strong enough for housework, cooking, and whatever else you might need." His suggestive wink made Madeline's stomach turn. 23-year-old Madeline had been married barely 2 years before consumption claimed her husband, leaving her with nothing but debts she never knew existed. The bank had seized their small homestead, and now, through some twisted interpretation of territorial law that treated wives as property, she faced the humiliation of being sold alongside her husband's meager possessions. $70, called a gruff voice from the crowd. Madeline recognized the speaker as Harlan Jeffers, the owner of the town saloon, a man known for his cruel treatment of the women who worked for him. 80, countered another man, whose reputation was equally unsavory. Tears streamed down Madeline's face as she kept her eyes fixed on the wooden planks beneath her feet. She had no family to turn to, no friends powerful enough to intervene. In the harsh reality of the frontier, a woman alone had few options. The bids continued to rise, reaching $120 when a deep, unfamiliar voice cut through the commotion. "This sale is unlawful." The crowd parted as a tall figure moved forward. Madeline lifted her gaze to see a stranger standing before the auctioneer's platform. Dust from the trail still clung to his long coat, and the silver spurs on his boots caught the afternoon sunlight. His face was partially shadowed by a wide-brimmed hat, but she could make out a strong jaw covered in several days' worth of beard. "And who might you be to interrupt official business?" the auctioneer demanded, clearly annoyed at the disruption. "The name's Fletcher Powell," the stranger replied, removing his hat to reveal piercing blue eyes and sun-streaked brown hair. "I'm familiar enough with territorial law to know a woman can't be sold like property, regardless of her husband's debts." The auctioneer sputtered. "The debt must be settled, and she has nothing else of value." Fletcher's gaze shifted briefly to Madeline, then back to the auctioneer. "How much is owed?" $243, the auctioneer replied after consulting his ledger. Without hesitation, Fletcher reached into his coat and pulled out a leather pouch. He counted out gold coins onto the auctioneer's table. $250. "That covers the debt and your fee." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Madeline could scarcely believe what she was witnessing. "What about the burial costs?" the undertaker called out from the edge of the gathering. Fletcher added another $20 to the pile. "Does that satisfy all claims against Mrs. Frost and her late husband?" The town's banker, who had been observing from nearby, stepped forward and nodded reluctantly. "The debt is considered paid in full." Fletcher turned to Madeline and spoke in a voice only she could hear. "Mrs. Frost, I know this is unexpected, but you have a choice now. You can stay in a town that would sell you beside your husband's coffin, or you can leave with me. I have a ranch about a day's ride from here where you can work as my housekeeper until you decide what you want to do next." Madeline stared at him, trying to discern his true intentions. "Why would you help me? You don't even know me." Fletcher's expression softened slightly. "Because no one should have to endure what you've just been through, and because I believe in second chances." He looked toward the coffin and then back at her. "Your husband may be gone, but you'll live again." With those words, Madeline felt something stir within her that she thought had died alongside Charles' hope. She looked around at the townspeople who had gathered to witness her humiliation, at the coffin that held the man she had married out of practicality rather than passion, and then at the stranger offering her an escape. "I'll go with you," she whispered, her voice strengthening with each word. "There's nothing for me here anymore." As Fletcher led her away from the auction, past the stunned onlookers and her husband's coffin, Madeline couldn't help but wonder if she was making another mistake by trusting this mysterious cowboy. But for the first time in months, she was making her own choice. The journey to Fletcher Powell's ranch was mostly silent. Madeline sat stiffly on the horse he had provided for her. Her few possessions, a small bundle of clothes and a locket containing a portrait of her parents, tied securely behind the saddle. The Montana landscape sprawled around them, vast and indifferent to her plight. "We'll stop for the night soon," Fletcher said as the sun began its descent toward the western mountains. "There's a clearing by the creek up ahead that makes for good camping." Madeline nodded, her body aching from hours in the saddle. She had ridden before, but not often, and not for such distances. When they reached the clearing, Fletcher dismounted with practiced ease and came to help her down. His hands were strong but gentle as they spanned her waist, and she felt a strange flutter in her stomach at the contact. "Thank you," she said quietly, stepping away once her feet were on solid ground. Fletcher busied himself making camp, tethering the horses, gathering firewood, and preparing a simple meal of beans, bacon, and coffee. Madeline insisted on helping despite her exhaustion, unwilling to begin their arrangement by appearing helpless. As they sat by the fire eating from tin plates, Madeline finally found the courage to ask the questions that had been plaguing her. "Mr. Powell, I'm grateful for your intervention today, but I still don't understand why you were there or why you would spend your own money to help a stranger." Fletcher took a sip of his coffee before answering. "I was in Willow Creek on business selling some cattle. I overheard talk about the auction at the general store and couldn't believe what I was hearing." He stared into the fire. "My mother was left widowed when I was just a boy. If not for the kindness of others, we might have faced a similar fate." "That's admirable," Madeline acknowledged. "But surely there was a less costly way to help." A hint of a smile touched his lips. "Perhaps, but I've found that sometimes the direct approach is best." He set his empty plate aside. "Besides, I've been looking for someone to help at the ranch. My last housekeeper left to get married 3 months ago, and the place has fallen into disarray since then. So it was also a practical decision," Madeline said, feeling oddly disappointed. "Yes," Fletcher admitted, "but that doesn't make it any less right." They fell silent again, the crackling of the fire and the distant sound of owls filling the night air. Madeline stared up at the stars, so much brighter here than they had been in town, and wondered what tomorrow would bring. "Get some rest," Fletcher said eventually, gesturing to the bedroll he had set up for her on the opposite side of the fire from his own. "We have a few more hours of riding tomorrow." Madeline nodded and retreated to her bedroll, wrapping herself in the wool blanket he had provided. Despite her physical exhaustion, sleep eluded her as she replayed the events of the day. The humiliation of the auction, the shock of Fletcher's intervention, and the uncertainty of her future all swirled in her mind. She studied the man across the fire, now lying with his hat tipped over his face. Fletcher Powell was a mystery, a seemingly decent man in a world that had shown her little decency lately. Whether he would remain so was yet to be seen. With that thought, Madeline finally drifted into an uneasy sleep, the weight of her grief momentarily lightened by the prospect of a new beginning. They arrived at Fletcher's ranch the following afternoon. Madeline's eyes widened as they crested a hill, and she beheld the spread below them, a substantial main house built of logs and stone, a large barn, several corrals, and various outbuildings, all situated in a verdant valley with mountains rising in the distance. "Welcome to Silverwater Ranch," Fletcher said, a note of pride in his voice. "It's much larger than I expected, Madeline admitted as they rode down toward the house. My father started with just 20 acres and 6 cattle, Fletcher explained. I've expanded it to over 2,000 acres over the past 10 years. We run about 500 head of cattle now, and I've started breeding horses as well. As they approached the main house, a weathered man with silver hair emerged onto the porch. About time you got back, he called out. Was beginning to think you'd gotten lost. Fletcher dismounted and helped Madeline down from her horse. Hank, this is Mrs. Madeline Frost. She'll be taking over as housekeeper. Mrs. Frost, this is Hank Miller, my foreman and the closest thing to family I have out here. Hank's bushy eyebrows rose as he tipped his hat to Madeline. Madam, pleased to meet you. Likewise, Mr. Miller, Madeline replied, smoothing her wrinkled dress self-consciously. Hank, could you see to the horses? I'm going to show Mrs. Frost to her quarters and get her settled in. Sure thing, boss, Hank said, taking the reins of both horses and leading them toward the barn, though not before giving Fletcher a questioning look that Madeline pretended not to notice. The interior of the house was spacious but sparsely furnished, with sturdy, functional pieces rather than decorative ones. Fletcher led her through the main living area, a dining room, and a kitchen that was larger than the entire cabin she had shared with Charles. Your room is this way, he said, leading her down a hallway off the kitchen. It used to be Mrs. Larson's, our previous housekeeper. The room was simple but comfortable, with a single bed, a chest of drawers, a small writing desk, and a window overlooking a garden that had clearly seen better days. The washroom is at the end of the hall, Fletcher continued. I've had running water piped in from the spring on the hill, one of the advantages of having a ranch near the mountains. Madeline placed her bundle on the bed. It's very nice, thank you. I'll leave you to get settled. There's a dress in the wardrobe that Mrs. Larson left behind. It might fit you until you can get some more clothes. He hesitated at the door. We usually eat dinner at 6. The kitchen is stocked, but I understand if you need time to rest after everything that's happened. No, Madeline said firmly. I'll prepare dinner. That's what I'm here for, isn't it? Fletcher nodded, studying her for a moment. Yes, I suppose it is. But there's no rush, Mrs. Frost. You've been through a lot. After he left, Madeline sat on the edge of the bed, feeling strangely detached from her surroundings. Just yesterday morning, she had awoken beside her husband's coffin in the parlor of their small cabin, dreading the funeral that would leave her alone with debts she couldn't pay. Now, she was in a stranger's home, miles from everything familiar, expected to cook and clean for a man she barely knew. But as she unpacked her few belongings and changed into the dress Fletcher had mentioned, which fit reasonably well despite being a bit loose in the waist, Madeline reminded herself that she was fortunate. Instead of becoming a saloon girl or worse, she had a respectable position and a roof over her head. When she entered the kitchen to prepare dinner, she found it well stocked but disorganized. It was clear that Fletcher and Hank had been fending for themselves. Dishes were stacked haphazardly, flour and coffee grounds dusted various surfaces, and the stove needed a thorough cleaning. Madeline rolled up her sleeves and set to work. By the time 6 o'clock approached, she had restored order to the kitchen and prepared a simple but hearty meal of roasted chicken, potatoes, and carrots from the garden, along with fresh bread she had found wrapped in a cloth in the pantry. When Fletcher and Hank entered the dining room, both men stopped short at the sight of the properly set table and the steaming dishes. Well, I'll be, Hank said, removing his hat and running a hand through his hair. Smells like heaven, Mrs. Frost. Fletcher nodded in agreement. This is impressive, especially on such short notice. Madeline felt a small surge of pride. Please, sit down before it gets cold. As they ate, the men discussed ranch business cattle that needed to be moved to different pastures, a fence line that needed repair, preparations for the coming winter. Madeline listened silently, learning about her new home through their conversation. "Mrs. Frost," Fletcher said eventually, turning his attention to her. "I realize we haven't discussed the specifics of your position here. Your duties would include cooking, cleaning, laundry, and general upkeep of the house. In return, you'll receive room and board, plus $15 a month." Madeline's eyes widened at the generous wage. "That seems more than fair, Mr. Powell." "Fletcher, please," he said. "And I should mention that Sundays are yours to do with as you please, though it's a fair ride to town if you want to attend church services." "I would like that," Madeline said, thinking of the comfort she had always found in the small church in Willow Creek. "Good. Then it's settled," Fletcher said, pushing back from the table. "That was an excellent meal, Mrs. Frost. I'm looking forward to more like it." As Madeline cleared the dishes, she caught Hank giving Fletcher a significant look. "What?" Fletcher asked his foreman. Hank shook his head. "Nothing. Just thinking it's good to have a woman's touch around here again." He tipped his hat to Madeline. "Thank you for the meal, madam. Best I've had in months." After the men left to check on a new foal in the barn, Madeline finished cleaning up, her mind turning over the strange new chapter in her life. She had gone from a widow facing public humiliation to a housekeeper with wages and a day off, all because a stranger had decided she deserved a second chance. "You'll live again," he had said. Standing in the quiet kitchen of Silverwater Ranch, Madeline wondered if perhaps he might be right. The following weeks fell into a rhythm as Madeline settled into her role at Silverwater Ranch. She rose before dawn to prepare breakfast for Fletcher and the ranch hands, spent her mornings cleaning and organizing the house, and her afternoons cooking and tending to the neglected garden. The physical labor was a welcome distraction from her grief, and the satisfaction of seeing order restored to the home gave her a sense of purpose she had lacked since Charles's illness. Fletcher was often gone during the day, riding out with his men to manage the vast property, but he was unfailingly polite when their paths crossed. He never questioned her methods or complained about her cooking, and he seemed genuinely appreciative of the improvements she made to the house. One evening in late October, as Madeline was hanging freshly washed curtains in the living room, Fletcher returned earlier than usual. He paused in the doorway watching her work. "Those look nice," he said, startling her slightly. "I'd forgotten they were blue." Madeline stepped down from the chair she had been standing on. "They were so dusty it was hard to tell. I found some fabric dye in the storeroom and refreshed the color." Fletcher nodded approvingly, then held out a package wrapped in brown paper. "I was in town today. Thought you might need these." Curious, Madeline unwrapped the package to find 3 lengths of fabric, one a practical blue cotton, another a warm burgundy wool, and the third a soft green calico. "For dresses," Fletcher explained, looking slightly uncomfortable. "Winter's coming, and I noticed you don't have many clothes." Madeline ran her fingers over the fabrics, touched by the thoughtful gesture. "This is very kind of you, Fletcher." "Thank you. It's practical," he said with a shrug. "Can't have my housekeeper freezing when the snow comes." But there was a warmth in his eyes that belied his matter-of-fact tone. "Still, thank you," she repeated. "I'll start working on them right away." As promised, Fletcher took Madeline to town for church the following Sunday. The journey to the nearest settlement, a place called Pinewood Crossing, took nearly 2 hours by wagon. It was larger than Willow Creek, with a proper church, a school, several stores, and even a small hotel. The church service provided Madeline with a comforting sense of normalcy, and afterward, Fletcher gave her time to shop for necessities while he attended to business at the general store. She purchased thread to match her new fabrics, some hairpins, and a small jar of lavender-scented cream that reminded her of her mother. As they drove back to the ranch, Madeline found herself studying Fletcher's profile, noticing the way the afternoon sun highlighted the angles of his face. He was handsome in a rugged way, with lines at the corners of his eyes that suggested he smiled more than she had yet witnessed. "Thank you for bringing me to town," she said. "It was nice to attend church again." Fletcher glanced at her. "You're welcome. I'm not much for organized religion myself, but I understand it brings comfort to many." "Your mother raised you in the church?" "She did," he confirmed. "But after she passed, I found my own way of understanding the world." "I'm sorry about your mother," Madeline said softly. "How old were you when she died?" 15. "Old enough to work, young enough to still need her." The simple honesty of his answer touched her. "My parents died when I was 18. Influenza took them both within a week of each other. That's when I married Charles. He was my father's business partner, and it seemed the sensible thing to do." Fletcher was quiet for a moment. "Was it a good marriage?" Madeline considered the question. "It was. Respectful. Charles was kind if distant. He was 20 years my senior and set in his ways. We were more like companions than anything else." "And there were no children?" "No," she said, a familiar ache in her chest. "We had hoped, but it wasn't to be." Fletcher nodded, keeping his eyes on the road. "Life rarely goes according to plan out here in the territories." "No," Madeline agreed. "It certainly doesn't." They rode in companionable silence for a while, the rhythmic clop of the horses' hooves and the creak of the wagon wheels the only sounds between them. "Fletcher," Madeline said eventually, "may I ask you something?" "Of course. Why haven't you married? You have a successful ranch, you're—" She hesitated, feeling her cheeks warm. "Not unattractive. Surely there have been opportunities." A half-smile corked his lips at her awkward compliment. "There have been. I was engaged once about 5 years ago. A schoolteacher who came out from Boston. Elizabeth was her name." "What happened?" "She couldn't adjust to life out here. The isolation, the harsh winters, the endless work. It wasn't the romantic adventure she had imagined." His expression grew distant. "She left on the spring stagecoach. Married a banker in St. Louis, last I heard." "I'm sorry," Madeline said. Understanding now why he had been so quick to help her, he recognized the plight of someone who didn't belong. "Don't be," Fletcher replied. "She was right to go. Some people aren't meant for this life." He looked at Madeline. "What about you, Mrs. Frost? Do you think you could adapt to it?" The question seemed to carry more weight than a simple inquiry about her suitability as a housekeeper. Madeline gazed at the landscape rolling by, the golden prairie grass waving in the breeze, the distant mountains crowned with early snow, the vast sky stretching endlessly above them. "I think I could," she said thoughtfully. "There's a freedom here that I never had before, and a beauty that makes the hardships worthwhile." Fletcher studied her for a moment longer, then nodded as if satisfied with her answer. "Good. That's good to hear." As winter descended on Silverwater Ranch, the pace of life slowed. The cattle were moved to sheltered pastures closer to the main house, the horses were brought in from the far corrals, and preparations were made for the long, cold months ahead. Madeline found herself busier than ever preserving the last of the garden harvest, mending clothes and blankets, and cooking heartier meals to fortify the men against the biting cold. Fletcher spent more time at the house, using the winter months to catch up on paperwork, repair equipment, and plan for the spring. Madeline began to learn more about him through these extended interactions: how he took his coffee, black, with just a touch of sugar, that he preferred reading historical accounts to fiction, and that he had a surprising talent for whittling, creating intricate figures from blocks of pine with his pocket knife. One evening in early December, as a snowstorm raged outside, Madeline sat by the fire in the living room, working on a new dress from the green calico Fletcher had given her. He sat in the armchair opposite, a ledger open on his lap but his attention on the wooden eagle taking shape in his hands. Where did you learn to do that? Madeline asked, nodding toward his carving. Fletcher glanced up. My grandfather taught me. He was a furniture maker before he came west. You're very skilled, she observed. The detail in the feathers is remarkable. He turned the piece over in his hands. It passes the time, keeps my hands busy when my mind needs rest. He set the carving aside and closed his ledger. May I ask you something, Mrs. Frost? Of course. She set her sewing down, giving him her full attention. You've been here almost 2 months now. Are you content with your situation? Madeline considered the question carefully. I am. More than I expected to be, honestly. Good. But I've been thinking. He was interrupted by a sudden pounding on the front door. Fletcher rose quickly, his hand instinctively moving to the revolver he kept on a shelf nearby. Stay here, he instructed, moving to answer the door. Madeline heard men's voices, Fletcher's calm but concerned, another's urgent and unfamiliar. After a few minutes, Fletcher returned with a snow-covered stranger. Madeline, this is Tom Jenkins. He's a trapper who works the hills to the north. Tom, Mrs. Frost, my housekeeper. The man nodded respectfully, removing his ice-encrusted hat. Madam, sorry to intrude on such a night. Not at all, Madeline said, rising. You must be freezing. Let me get you some coffee. As she moved to the kitchen, she heard Tom explaining that he'd found a family, a man, woman, and 2 children stranded in the storm. Their wagon had broken an axle on the way to Pinewood Crossing, and they were in danger of freezing to death. By the time Madeline returned with coffee, Fletcher was already pulling on his heavy coat. Saddle Thunderbolt and Midnight, he was telling Hank, who had come in from the bunkhouse, and prepare the guest rooms. Madeline will need hot water, blankets, and whatever food can be quickly prepared. Of course, she replied, setting the coffee down for Tom. What else can I do? Fletcher paused, surprised by her immediate willingness to help. Just have everything ready. We don't know what condition they'll be in when we bring them back. For the next hour, Madeline worked alongside the cook from the bunkhouse, preparing broth and stew, heating water for baths, and gathering every spare blanket in the house. The storm continued unabated, howling around the eaves of the house like a living thing. When the men finally returned, they brought with them a family near collapse from exposure. Jacob and Sarah Miller and their children, Emma and Daniel, aged 10 and 8. The children were frightened but otherwise unharmed, protected by their parents who had given them the majority of their blankets and food. The axle broke 3 days ago, Jacob explained as he sat wrapped in blankets by the fire, his hands wrapped around a mug of broth. We were trying to make it to my brother's place outside of Pinewood. I thought we could walk it, but the storm came on faster than I expected. You're lucky Tom found you, Fletcher said. Another night out there and... He left the sentence unfinished, glancing at the children who were being tended to by Madeline and Sarah in the kitchen. We owe you our lives, Jacob said solemnly. I don't know how we can repay such a debt. Fletcher waved away his concern. No debt necessary. Anyone would have done the same. But as Madeline helped Sarah bathe the children and put them to bed in one of the guest rooms, she knew that wasn't true. Not everyone would ride out into a blizzard to save strangers. Not everyone would open their home without question to a family in need. Fletcher Powell was proving to be a man of exceptional character, and that realization stirred something within her that she had long thought dormant. Later that night, after everyone else had gone to bed, Madeline found Fletcher in the kitchen, staring out the window at the still falling snow. You should rest, she said softly. It's been a long day. He turned, looking weary but satisfied. I will soon. Just making sure the horses are settled after their ordeal. What you did tonight was remarkable, Madeline said, moving to stand beside him. You saved 4 lives. Fletcher shrugged uncomfortably. Tom's the one who found them. I just provided transportation and shelter. You're too modest, she chided gently. Not everyone would have ridden out in that storm. Not everyone would welcome strangers into their home so readily. He looked down at her, his expression softening in the lamplight. Perhaps, but I believe we're measured by how we treat those in need, not by how we treat those who can benefit us. Madeline felt a warmth spread through her chest that had nothing to do with the kitchen stove. Without thinking, she reached out and placed her hand on his arm. Thank you, she said quietly. For what? For reminding me that there are still good men in the world. After everything that happened with Charles's debts and the auction. She shook her head. I had begun to lose faith. Fletcher covered her hand with his own, the touch sending a surprising tremor through her. The world is full of both cruelty and kindness, Madeline. Sometimes we just need help seeing the latter. It was the first time he had used her given name, and the intimacy of it, combined with the warmth of his hand on hers, made her heart race. For a moment, they stood there in the quiet kitchen, connected by touch and something unspoken that hung in the air between them. Then Fletcher gently withdrew his hand. You should get some rest too. Our guests will need attending to in the morning. Madeline nodded, suddenly unsure of herself. Good night, Fletcher. Good night, Madeline. As she made her way to her room, Madeline realized that something fundamental had shifted between them. She was no longer just a housekeeper, and he was no longer just her employer. What exactly they were becoming, she wasn't certain, but the prospect both thrilled and terrified her. The Miller family stayed at Silverwater Ranch for nearly a week while Jacob repaired their wagon with Fletcher's help. During that time, Madeline formed a friendship with Sarah, who was close to her in age and similarly had married young. Jacob and I were childhood sweethearts, Sarah explained as they prepared dinner together one evening. We married when I was 17, had Emma by 18. It's been a hard life, but a good one. You love him very much, Madeline observed, noting the way Sarah's eyes softened whenever she spoke of her husband. With all my heart, Sarah confirmed. What about you and Mr. Powell? How long have you been married? Madeline nearly dropped the bowl she was holding. Oh, no, we're not married. I'm his housekeeper. Sarah looked genuinely surprised. Really? I just assumed. The way he looks at you, I thought for certain. How does he look at me? Madeline asked, trying to sound casual but feeling her pulse quicken. Sarah smiled knowingly. Like a man who's found something precious he never expected to find. She touched Madeline's arm gently. And if I'm not mistaken, you look at him much the same way. Madeline busied herself with chopping vegetables, unsure how to respond. Was it that obvious? Had her growing feelings for Fletcher become so transparent that even a virtual stranger could see them? It's complicated, she finally said. I'm a recent widow and Fletcher. Well, he rescued me from a difficult situation. I owe him too much to presume anything more. Gratitude and love aren't mutually exclusive, Sarah pointed out. And from what Jacob has told me about your employer, Mr. Powell isn't the type of man to hold a debt over someone's head. No, he isn't, Madeline agreed softly. But that doesn't mean I should impose my feelings on him. He hired a housekeeper, not a wife. Sarah regarded her thoughtfully. Perhaps, but sometimes life brings us unexpected gifts. It would be a shame to reject one out of fear or misplaced propriety. The conversation lingered in Madeline's mind long after the Millers departed for Pinewood Crossing with their repaired wagon and supplies donated by Fletcher. Had she misinterpreted Fletcher's kindness as something more? Or was Sarah right? Was there something growing between them that transcended their formal arrangement? Christmas arrived with clear skies and fresh snow blanketing the ranch. Madeline had spent the previous weeks secretly preparing gifts for Fletcher and Hank, a new scarf for the foreman, knitted from wool she had purchased in town, and for Fletcher, a leather-bound journal she had found in Pinewood Crossing, along with a carved wooden frame containing a sketch she had made of the ranch house. To her surprise, Fletcher had arranged for a small pine tree to be cut and brought into the living room. "It's tradition," he explained when she expressed her amazement. "My mother always insisted on decorating for Christmas, no matter how difficult times were." Together, they adorned the tree with simple ornaments, pine cones dipped in wax, red berries strung on thread, and small wooden figures Fletcher had carved. The ranch hands joined them for a Christmas Eve dinner that Madeline prepared with special care: roast beef, potatoes, fresh bread, and a dried apple pie for dessert. After the men had returned to the bunkhouse, Madeline and Fletcher sat by the fire, enjoying the peaceful glow of the tree. "I have something for you," Fletcher said, reaching beside his chair and producing a small package wrapped in brown paper and tied with a red ribbon. "But we agreed to exchange gifts tomorrow," Madeline protested weakly, touched by the gesture. "This one seems right for tonight," he said, handing it to her. Madeline carefully unwrapped the package to reveal a small wooden box with an intricate design carved on the lid, a scene of mountains, trees, and a rising sun. Opening it, she gasped at the sight of a delicate silver locket. "Fletcher, it's beautiful," she breathed, lifting it from the box. "Open it," he encouraged. Inside was a tiny pressed wildflower, a mountain bluebell, preserved between two small panes of glass. "I found it on the hill behind the house last spring," Fletcher explained. "It reminded me of your eyes." Madeline looked up at him, her heart pounding. "I don't know what to say." "You don't need to say anything," he assured her. "I just wanted you to have something beautiful." He hesitated, then added, "May I?" He gestured to the locket. Madeline nodded, turning slightly as Fletcher took the locket and gently fastened it around her neck, his fingers brushing against her skin, sending a shiver down her spine. "Perfect," he murmured, his face close to hers. In that moment, with the Christmas tree glowing in the corner and the fire crackling beside them, Madeline felt an overwhelming urge to close the distance between them. But before she could gather her courage, Fletcher stood and moved toward the window. "It's snowing again," he observed, his back to her. "Looks like we'll have a white Christmas after all." Madeline touched the locket at her throat, wondering if she had imagined the intensity of the moment. "Yes," she said softly. "It appears we will." As January gave way to February, the ranch settled into the quiet rhythm of deep winter. The days were short, the work confined largely to maintaining the livestock and keeping the paths between buildings clear of snow. Madeline found herself spending more time indoors, catching up on mending, organizing the pantry, and reading from Fletcher's surprisingly extensive library. Fletcher, too, was often in the house, working on ranch accounts, writing letters to cattle buyers, and planning for the spring. They developed a comfortable routine, sharing meals, discussing books, and occasionally playing checkers or cards in the evening. But something had changed since Christmas. There was a new awareness between them, an unspoken acknowledgement of feelings that neither seemed ready to voice aloud. Madeline would catch Fletcher watching her when he thought she wasn't looking, his expression thoughtful and tender, and she knew she was guilty of the same, her eyes drawn to him as he worked or read by the fire, admiring the strength in his hands, the intelligence in his eyes, the quiet confidence in his bearing. One afternoon, as a particularly fierce blizzard raged outside, Madeline was startled by a crash from Fletcher's study. She hurried to investigate and found him standing amidst broken glass, his face pale. "Fletcher, are you all right?" He looked up, seeming disoriented. "I'm fine. Just dropped a lamp." But even as he spoke, he swayed slightly. Madeline rushed to his side, guiding him to a chair. "You're not fine," You're burning up. She pressed a hand to his forehead, alarmed at the heat radiating from his skin. It's nothing, he insisted. Just tired. It's not nothing, she countered, already moving to clean up the broken lamp. You're ill. When did this start? This morning, he admitted reluctantly. Thought it would pass. Madeline helped him to his bedroom, where he collapsed onto the bed, too weak to protest further. For the next 3 days, she barely left his side, applying cool compresses to his fever-flushed skin, spooning broth and medicine between his cracked lips, and reading aloud to him during his brief periods of lucidity. Hank and the other ranch hands checked in regularly, but the storm had made it impossible to fetch a doctor from town. Madeline was on her own, drawing on what she had learned caring for Charles during his final illness. On the 3rd night, as the fever peaked, Fletcher became delirious, thrashing and calling out names Madeline didn't recognize. She held his hand, whispering reassurances and praying fervently for his recovery. Elizabeth, he murmured at one point, his eyes unfocused. Don't go. Madeline's heart constricted, but she continued bathing his face with cool water. Shoo, it's all right. Rest now. His fingers tightened around hers. Madeline? Is that you? Yes, she said softly. I'm here, Fletcher. Don't leave me, he whispered, his voice breaking. Everyone leaves. Tears pricked her eyes at the raw vulnerability in his voice. I won't leave you, she promised. I'm right here. He seemed to relax at that, his breathing becoming more regular as he drifted back into sleep. Madeline continued her vigil through the night, dozing occasionally in the chair beside his bed but never releasing his hand. By morning, the fever had broken. Fletcher woke, weak but clear-eyed, to find Madeline asleep in the chair, her head resting on the edge of his bed, her hand still clasping his. Madeline, he said hoarsely. She stirred immediately, sitting up and blinking the sleep from her eyes. Fletcher, how do you feel? Like I've been trampled by a herd of buffalo, he said with a weak smile. But better than before. Relief flooded her face. Your fever's broken. I was so worried. Fletcher looked down at their joined hands, then back at her exhausted face. You stayed with me the whole time. Of course I did, she said simply. You needed care. He studied her for a long moment. It was more than duty, wasn't it? Madeline hesitated, then nodded, unable to deny it any longer. Yes, it was more than duty. Fletcher squeezed her hand gently. When I was burning with fever, I had a dream, or maybe it wasn't a dream. I asked you not to leave me, and you promised you wouldn't. I remember, she whispered. Did you mean it? The question hung between them, fraught with meaning beyond the simple words. Madeline took a deep breath, gathering her courage. I meant it, she said. If you want me to stay, not just as your housekeeper, but as someone who cares deeply for you, then yes, I'll stay. Fletcher raised a hand to her cheek, his touch gentle despite his weakness. I want that more than anything, Madeline. I think I have since the day I found you in Willow Creek, standing beside your husband's coffin with more dignity and courage than anyone I'd ever seen. Madeline leaned into his touch, her heart full to bursting. I never expected to feel this way again, to feel anything again after Charles died. But you were right that day. You said I would live again, and because of you I have. Fletcher's eyes were tender as he looked at her. We've both been given a second chance. I don't intend to waste it. Neither do I, Madeline whispered, and when Fletcher gently pulled her closer, she went willingly, their lips meeting in a kiss that felt like coming home after a long, difficult journey. As spring returned to Silverwater Ranch, bringing with it new calves, green grass, and wildflowers dotting the hillsides, Madeline and Fletcher's relationship blossomed openly. The ranch hands were unsurprised by the development Hank later admitted that he and the others had been placing bets on when the boss and his housekeeper would finally acknowledge what had been obvious to everyone else for months. Fletcher formally courted Madeline, taking her for rides across the property, bringing her wildflowers, and even escorting her to a dance in Pinewood Crossing, where they were the talk of the town, the prosperous rancher and the widow he had rescued from an auction block. On a warm evening in May, Fletcher took Madeline to the hill behind the house where the bluebells that matched her eyes were blooming in profusion. As the sun set over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, he knelt before her and asked her to be his wife. "I know it hasn't been a full year since Charles passed," he said, holding her hands in his. "If you need more time, I understand. But I want you to know that I love you, Madeline Frost, and I want to spend the rest of my life with you not as my housekeeper, but as my wife and partner." Tears of joy spilled down Madeline's cheeks. "I don't need more time, Fletcher. I love you too more than I ever thought possible. Yes, I will marry you." They were wed in June in the small church in Pinewood Crossing, with Hank serving as best man and Sarah Miller, who had become a dear friend, standing up for Madeline. The entire ranch turned out for the celebration, along with most of the townsfolk who had heard the romantic tale of how Fletcher had saved Madeline from a life of servitude or worse. As Madeline stood beside Fletcher, speaking vows that this time came from her heart rather than practicality, she thought of the journey that had brought her here, the grief, the humiliation, the despair, and finally, the hope and love she had found when she least expected it. "You may kiss the bride," the pastor said, and as Fletcher leaned down to claim her lips, Madeline knew with absolute certainty that this was where she was meant to be, not just living again, but truly alive for perhaps the first time. The years that followed brought challenges, as life on the frontier always did. There was a drought that threatened the cattle, a fire that nearly claimed the barn, and tensions with neighboring ranchers over water rights. But through it all, Madeline and Fletcher faced each obstacle together, their bond strengthening with each trial overcome. In their second year of marriage, Madeline discovered she was expecting a child, something she had long ago resigned herself to never experiencing. Fletcher's joy was boundless, and when their daughter was born on a snowy December night, they named her Hope, a testament to the second chance they had both been given. 2 years later, a son joined their family, strong and sturdy like his father, with Madeline's blue eyes. They called him William after Fletcher's father. Silverwater Ranch prospered under their joint stewardship. Fletcher's business acumen and Madeline's organizational skills proved a formidable combination, and they expanded their operations to include not just cattle but also horses, which Madeline discovered she had a particular talent for training. On the 5th anniversary of their wedding, Fletcher presented Madeline with a gift, the deed to a plot of land adjacent to the ranch, where he had built a school for the children of ranch hands and neighboring homesteaders. Remembering her once expressed desire to teach, he had arranged for books and supplies to be brought from Denver. "You've given me so much, Fletcher," Madeline said as they stood in the doorway of the small schoolhouse. "A home, a family, a purpose." "You've given me far more," he replied, wrapping his arms around her from behind as they watched Hope and William playing in the schoolyard. "You've given me a reason to build something lasting, a legacy that goes beyond cattle and land." Madeline leaned back against his chest, content in a way she had never imagined possible that day in Willow Creek, standing beside her first husband's coffin. "Do you ever think about that day?" she asked softly. "The auction?" Fletcher rested his chin on the top of her head. "Sometimes. I think about how close I came to not being in that town on that day, and it terrifies me to think of what might have happened. I believe we were meant to find each other," Madeline said. "That somehow, through all the pain and loss, we were being guided to this place, this life." "I think you're right," Fletcher agreed, "though I'm not sure I deserved such good fortune." Madeline turned in his arms to face him. "You deserved every happiness, Fletcher Powell. You're a good man, the best man I've ever known. And I thank God every day that you were there to say those words that changed everything. She'll live again, Fletcher quoted softly, touching her cheek. I had no idea then how true those words would become, or how completely you would bring life back to this ranch and to me. Madeline smiled up at him, her heart full of the love that had grown between them over the years, a love forged in adversity, tempered by shared struggles, and made unbreakable by the family they had created together. We both live now, she said, rising on tiptoes to kiss him as their children's laughter echoed around them. A joyful testament to second chances and the unexpected paths that lead to home. As the years passed, Silverwater Ranch became known throughout the territory not just for its fine cattle and horses, but also for the family that made it a beacon of hope and community in the often harsh landscape of the Montana frontier. The school that Fletcher had built for Madeline grew as more families settled in the area, eventually becoming the cornerstone of a small but thriving community. Madeline taught there 3 days a week, sharing her love of literature, history, and mathematics with children who might otherwise have had little formal education. Hope, their firstborn, inherited her mother's intelligence and her father's determined spirit. By the time she was 16, she was helping Madeline with the younger students and dreaming of attending college in the East, a dream her parents fully supported, even as they knew her accomplishment would take her far from home. William, 2 years younger than his sister, showed a natural affinity for ranch work from an early age. He shadowed Fletcher from the moment he could walk, absorbing everything about cattle, horses, and land management. By 15, he was already considered one of the best young horsemen in the territory. Their family expanded again when Madeline, at 35, gave birth to twins, a boy and a girl they named Thomas and Sarah, after the trapper who had led Fletcher to the stranded Miller family that fateful Christmas, and the woman who had become Madeline's dearest friend. Through the joys and inevitable sorrows of family life, Fletcher and Madeline's bond remained unshakable. They were partners in every sense, consulting each other on ranch decisions, sharing responsibilities for the household and children, and always finding time to nurture the love that had blossomed between them against all odds. On a summer evening in 1898, 20 years after Fletcher had rescued Madeline from the auction block, they sat on the porch of their home, watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of purple and gold. Hope was away at Vassar College, having been admitted on scholarship, while William was in the barn, tending to a mare about to foal. The twins, now 10, were engaged in an elaborate game of make-believe in the yard. "Do you ever regret it?" Fletcher asked, his hand covering Madeline's on the arm of her rocking chair. "Regret what?" she asked, turning to look at her husband. His hair was silver now at the temples, and the lines around his eyes had deepened, but to her, he was as handsome as the day he had stood up for her in Willow Creek. "Staying here," he clarified. "You could have gone east after you'd saved enough money, started a new life in a city with more conveniences, more culture." Madeline smiled, shaking her head. "Not for a single moment. Everything I love is here, you, our children, the life we've built together." She gestured toward the distant mountains. "Besides, what city could offer a view like this?" Fletcher squeezed her hand. "I was thinking about retiring soon, letting William take over more of the daily operations of the ranch." "Retiring to do what?" Madeline asked, curious. Fletcher had never been one for idleness. "To travel," he said. "You've never seen the ocean. I thought perhaps we might take a trip to California, see the Pacific. Or go east to visit Hope, see New York City." Madeline's eyes widened with excitement. "Truly? You would do that? For you? Anything." Fletcher's eyes crinkled with affection. "You've given me 20 years of happiness, Madeline. I'd like to give you the world in return, or at least as much of it as we can see together." Madeline leaned over to kiss him, her heart as full of love for this man as it had been on their wedding day. "I already have everything I could possibly want," she said. "But I would love to see the ocean with you." As the twins called for their attention, eager to show off some new discovery, Madeline thought back to that desperate day when she had stood beside Charles's coffin, facing a future of servitude or worse. How could she have known then that the tall, dusty stranger with the kind eyes would not only save her from that fate, but would give her a life richer and more fulfilling than anything she could have imagined? "She'll live again," he had said. And oh, how she had lived fully, deeply, joyfully, in ways she had never dreamed possible. Not just surviving, but truly living, with a man who had taught her the true meaning of love and partnership. As Fletcher rose to investigate the twins' discovery, holding out his hand to help her up from her chair, Madeline sent a silent prayer of gratitude to whatever forces had brought them together that day in Willow Creek. Their story, one that had begun with death and desperation, had become a testament to resilience, to second chances, and to the transformative power of love in the face of adversity. And as the sun slipped behind the mountains, painting the sky in the same colors that had adorned the heavens on the day Fletcher had proposed to her on the bluebell-covered hill, Madeline knew with absolute certainty that their greatest adventures were still to come.